All right, today we are diving into one of the biggest detective stories in the history of science. Seriously, it's a mystery that took centuries to unravel, involving brilliant minds and some truly game-changing inventions. And it all revolves around one simple but incredibly profound question.
So what is that question? It's this. What are you made of? What am I made of? A tree? An elephant? The mold growing on your bread? What are we all fundamentally made of? I mean, think about it. For thousands of years, nobody had a clue. To even begin to solve it, we first needed a way to see a world that was completely invisible to us.
So our first real break in the case, it didn't come from a biologist, which you might expect. Nope, it came from a physicist with a super curious mind and a powerful new piece of technology.
And this was the key that unlocked it all. The compound microscope. Back in the 17th century, instruments just like this one, used by the English scientist Robert Hooke, could magnify the world way beyond what any human eye had ever seen. So what's the first thing he points this incredible new gadget at? You know, of all the things in the world, a piece of cork. Yeah, cork.
So in his famous 1665 book Micrographia, Hooke publishes this drawing of what he saw. And it's just this bizarre, honeycomb-like world. A whole landscape of tiny, empty boxes. Now, it's important to remember, Hooke wasn't actually looking at living things here. Cork is just dead plant tissue. But what he saw was the first real piece of evidence in our case.
Okay, so he sees these little boxes. What do you call them? Well, they reminded him of the Latin word cella, which basically means a small room. Kind of like the simple rooms monks lived in. And just like that, the fundamental unit of life had a name, the cell.
All right, so we've got our first clue, the cell. But was this just some weird thing you only find in cork? Or was this a clue to something much, much bigger? Well, it took a while, like 2 whole centuries. But as microscopes got better and better, scientists started seeing these things everywhere. And by the 1830s, a really clear pattern was starting to take shape.
This is where our next 2 key detectives enter the story. On the left, Matthias Schladen, a botanist who was totally obsessed with plants. And on the right, Theodor Schwann, a zoologist studying animals. And what's really cool is that they were working pretty much separately, but they both started to notice the exact same thing, no matter what organism they put under the microscope.
And their final conclusion, which Schwann sums up perfectly here in 1839, was just mind-blowing. It didn't matter if you were looking at a plant or an animal, the fundamental building block was the cell. I mean, this was a huge deal. They laid down the first 2 big ideas of cell theory. First, all living things are made of cells, and second, the cell is the most basic unit of all life.
But, you know, just like in any good detective story, there was a twist. A big one. They had figured out what life was made of, but they got a huge piece of the puzzle completely wrong. They had no idea where new cells actually come from. And this sparked a huge debate. On one side, you had Schleiden and Schwann. They believed in something called free cell formation, which sounds kind of scientific, but it was basically the idea that cells could just, poof, crystallize out of nowhere, literally like magic. But on the other side, guys like Robert Remak and Rudolf Virchow were pushing a much more radical idea, that cells could only, ever, come from other cells. The whole debate was finally put to rest by this one simple, powerful Latin phrase, which was made famous by Virchow in 1855, omnis cellula e cellula. It means every cell from a pre-existing cell. No more spontaneous generation. No more magic. Life only comes from life. And this became the third critical piece of cell theory.
Okay, so now the theory feels pretty solid, right? It worked for skin, for muscle, for leaves, for roots, you name it. Except there was this one really stubborn part of the body that just didn't seem to follow the rules at all. The brain and the entire nervous system.
And when you look at it, you can totally see why they were so confused. I mean, look at this. Nerve tissue doesn't look like a bunch of neat little boxes. It's this incredibly complex, tangled-up web. It was so intricate that it just seemed impossible for it to be made of individual units. So, for decades, this led to what was called the reticular theory. And it was championed by a brilliant Italian scientist named Camillo Golgi. He was convinced the nervous system was the one great exception. A single, giant, continuous, fused-together network. And for a long time, it really looked like he was right. But then, enter the final hero of our story, a Spanish neuroanatomist named Santiago Ramón y Cajal.
And here is the best part, the ultimate scientific plot twist. Cajal used the exact same revolutionary cell staining method that Golgi himself had invented to prove him completely wrong. He showed with stunning clarity that the nervous system wasn't a web at all. It was, in fact, made of countless individual cells we now call neurons.
So, with the mystery of the brain finally solved, that last, tricky puzzle piece just clicked right into place. Cell theory was now a truly unifying idea that explained the structure of all known life on Earth. The case was officially closed.
So, after all that, centuries of work, brilliant minds, and heated debates, what did we end up with? Well, the core tenets of modern cell theory. It tells us that all living things are made of cells, that the cell is the most basic unit of life, and that all cells come from other cells. And since then, we've added a couple more key ideas, that all the energy that powers life happens inside cells, and that they carry the instruction manual for life, our DNA. This, right here, is the bedrock of all modern biology.
So, we did it. We solved the mystery of what all life is made of. But that elegant little phrase, omnis cellula acellula, it kind of leaves us hanging with one last, giant, mind-bending question. If every single cell has to come from another cell, then where in the world did the very first one come from? And that, well, that's a story for another time.